Hyundai has finally unveiled the Ioniq 5N version. It's been spied for a while now, and when the Ioniq first came out, I thought it was one of the best looking EVs out there. With its chisel design, old school hatchback design. They call it the crossover, but come on, you can't just call anything that you put out a crossover to make sales. This is more definitely in line of a hatchback design. I think we can all agree on that. Specifically the N version, because it sits lower, it's a sporty version. So what we're gonna do in this video is have a look at the spec and tech and the design of this new Ioniq 5N. We're gonna compare it to the regular Ioniq 5. There are some big changes, and these changes make a huge impact on this beautiful design. I like that Hyundai seems to have so much fun designing cars, and specifically now in the EV era, they're not just chasing this optimal shape for range, for maximum range, which is gonna end up being a bean shaped. Mercedes are very good at doing that. Instead, they're focusing on having fun in their designs, and that's why I'm a huge fan of Hyundai and Kia right now as well. So let's have a look at this article first of all, and then we're gonna jump into Photoshop, have a look at this in the front, side, rear, interior, and I'm gonna let you know what the differences are and what I think of them from the regular Ioniq 5. So this is a Car Buzz article. I'm gonna link this down in the description if you want to go and check out the full article. You have a dual motor powertrain, 641 horsepower and 568 pound-feet of torque when using the N-Grin boost mode, 0 to 62 miles per hour in 3.4 seconds. When you're using the boost, 3.5 without the boost, so essentially not a big difference there. And you also have a simulated 8-speed dual clutch transmission with clutch kick function in an EV. That will be very interesting to see what that feels like to drive, if it actually feels like a transmission or not. You have drift mode and electric rear limited slip diff as well in the Ioniq 5. And if you look at this thing, I think it just looks great. And as I said, we're gonna have more in-depth look at this in just a second in Photoshop. The power is continually varied front to rear via the N-torque distribution function, and at the rear axle you do have a limited slip differential. You also have high grip Pirelli P0 tires measuring 275 millimeter in width all around the car, so both in the front and in the rear. These are pretty wide tires to put on an EV, and I love that they did that with 21-inch wheels as well that look fantastic. And there are also other ICE-derived features too, like the simulated sounds, including a combustion engine and a fighter jet-inspired supersonic sounds. You know, I don't know how I feel about this, putting this simulated transmission, simulated sounds. It's like the cars are not just embracing that they are EVs. They're still trying to be EVs, but at the same time have some internal combustion engine features that are all fake. Yes, it might add to the, driving experience, but it just doesn't feel genuine to me. But I can't say anything until I've driven this car, because it looks like what I do appreciate that the Hyundai are actually putting in some effort into not just making awesome looking designs like this one. They're also trying to figure out how to make EVs more exciting to drive, and I have a huge respect for Hyundai for at least trying to do that, even though they might feel a little fake. So this simulated transmission, dubbed N-E-Shift, simulates the behaviors of Hyundai's 8-speed dual-clutch transmission, controlling motor torque deployment and creating a jolt between shifts for added layers of interaction. The Ioniq 5N will also alter engine braking and brake regen to mimic the chosen gear, with peak regen resulting in 0.6 Gs of negative acceleration, the highest of any brake regen system currently on the road. And I really like that, because why not take advantage of the regen braking when you have it? I think the EV6 and also the Genesis GV60, I think they have 2 weeks of a regen braking, and doesn't take advantage of it fully like we have in the Ioniq 5N here. You have an 8-volt architecture enabling fast charging, 10 to 80% of charging in as little as 18 minutes, which is decent. It's not bad at all. It's pretty fast. But I feel like I've also heard that standard number so many times before. It also sits lower and 2 inches wider than with the new bumpers that we have on the Ioniq 5N compared to the normal Ioniq. It makes it longer than the base model by an inch up front and just more than 2 at the rear, and that has to do with this beautiful diffuser that sticks up in the rear end. And you also have these 21-inch forged alloy wheels, make the proportions look more hot hatch than crossover, and that's exactly what I'm saying. Even with the normal Ioniq 5, it looks more hatchback than crossover. You get 10 colors to choose from with the Ioniq 5N, including the brand signature Performance Blue, which is available for the first time in both gloss, or you can have it in a matte finish. And I think it looks absolutely gorgeous in the matte blue with these orange accents that we have down here at the bottom and also in the back end. Now, the cabin of the Ioniq 5N immediately sets itself apart from its siblings with a dark theme. You have a lower seating position as well. It's almost an inch lower in this car, which I like. It's gonna feel like the car is hugging you. And there is also an all-new N steering wheel because you have different functions on the N version that needs to be incorporated in the steering wheel, and the normal Ioniq 5 steering wheel looks a little maybe goofy. We're gonna compare the two right now when we jump into Photoshop, but the pricing range and US arrival will all be confirmed at a later date, but it's expected for a 2024 launch. So let's have a look at this design here. Let's jump in and have some fun here right now in Photoshop and see what's going on. What is different with this new Ioniq 5N compared to the old one or the regular one? Up here, of course, this is the regular one. Down here we have the new Ioniq 5N, and you can see that they are very similar. I mean, the Ioniq 5 in itself just looks very cool. It has this very sharp design to it that is pretty uncommon when it comes to EVs. As I said, everybody's chasing this bean shape and having maximum range, as much range as possible, but having a shape like this, it might cut down on the range a little bit, maybe 10, 15, 20 miles. I have no idea, to be honest, but I would much rather have a cool design and not just have beans rolling around everywhere and then drop the range by I don't know how many percent and have a cool design like this. So the new one gets a completely brand new front fascia in the lower section, and this actually looks like it could be an internal combustion engine. I do love these fins, black fins that stick up right here in the middle on both sides, and then we have this texture in the middle part in the chamfer going underneath the headlights, and I think if I remember correctly, it is also available here on the regular Ioniq 5, but you just can't see it here. Might be wrong on that. I think it looks cool though to have this combination with the blue, and then you have these orange accents in the bottom part and going into the side view. And have a look at the intake, just how big this air intake is in the middle to cool the batteries. You also have some active vents here in the corners for brake cooling. So it's a very functional, and it's chiseled. It looks sharp and tight, and they didn't take away anything from the regular Ioniq 5. It added stuff onto it, but it still doesn't feel like anything here is out of place. So let's have a look at the side view, and this is a pretty big change here in the side because as we just talked about, it became longer. It just grew in the front and in the rear as well. And you can definitely see that here. Have a look at the Ioniq 5 up top, the non-N version, and specifically in this detail. I also want to bring your attention to these fender flares and how they are designed in the new one compared to the regular Ioniq 5. We still obviously have the key graphics with this arrow shape, creating a forward motion in the design, which I think looks fantastic. But they removed this almost Nintendo 8-bit feel in this section and just cleaned that up. We don't have that type of styling in the lower section of the Ioniq 5N, but starting with the rear end here, we do have a bigger spoiler. Roof spoiler stretches further back in this direction than it does in the normal Ioniq 5, and you also have this beautiful functional diffuser right here, and this point, this corner, is what makes this a longer vehicle because we don't have that same aggressive diffuser, of course, in the normal Ioniq 5. But look at these proportions. I'm not sure how anybody can call this a crossover and not a hatchback. it just blows my mind how they categorize this car, because it's definitely, as you can see, it's clearly not a crossover. And having a look at the line flow in here, same line flow that we have with the arrow shape. The proportions itself look like this could be an internal combustion engine. What gives it away is, I think, if we just moved the rear axle forward by maybe an inch or so, it would definitely give it proper internal combustion engine proportions. What gives it away is the wheelbase and just how far out in the corners the wheels sit. And you can also see the 21-inch wheels here with the 4-piston brake caliper in the front end being in the same orange as we have in going in the lower section, and then coming up in this beautiful side wing in the side skirt, just looking fantastic. And then these wheels, I mean, 21-inch wheels, 275 wide tires. What this tells me is that Hyundai is definitely focusing on the looks and the aesthetics of their EVs instead of just being completely blinded by how far will this EV go and the range, because having 275 with tires, it's definitely not gonna help the range, and neither is this sharp chiseled shape that we have of the Ioniq 5 in general. Moving on to the rear end of the new Ioniq 5N and comparing it to the regular Ioniq 5 up top. Here we have the new one down here, and have a look at the tire size difference here. This looks like a normal EV tire, pretty thin. I mean, it looks decent. It's not too it's not a bicycle tire still, but it doesn't have the same plantedness, nowhere near the same plantedness that we have in the N version. Just have a look at the width and beefiness of this tire and the 21-inch size of the wheel itself. It looks absolutely fantastic, and just have a look at how much more planted this car looks compared to the normal Ioniq 5. Fantastic job by changing this up. And the thing about these added pieces, as I said in the beginning of this video, the thing about these added pieces, it doesn't look, any of the added pieces are out of place. They feel very natural to the design because everything is connected with the rest of the graphics of the car. For example, this air outlet here, or this vent, and this diffuser, they all look very well integrated in the overall design of the car. You can see that they switched up the Nintendo 8-bit graphic that we have inside. They kept some version of it in the new and in the rear end, but they decided to go with a more pixelated shape of the, I think these are just reflector lights down there, and it looks really cool because I think this connects better with the graphics that we have in the key graphics in the rear end, which are the tail lights, than these slots that we have in the normal Ioniq 5. And you can see just how much wider this is, and we also don't have any sort of resemblance to the old wheel fenders here. Instead, they added a wider body kit onto this N version, which looks absolutely fantastic. And this, as I said, in addition with the wider tires and the big 21-inch wheels, it just completely transforms the stance and the feel, the vibe of this Ioniq 5. And this is a perfect example of just how important the wheel and tire setup is for any car. Now let's move into the interior, because this is not just, making the interiors black and call it a day. There's a lot of different changes in the interior compared to the normal Ioniq 5, which we have up here, which you can see is a bit lighter than the, definitely lighter feel than the Ioniq 5N. It got a lot darker down here. And then have a look at this area in the center console, in the bottom, in between the seats. We have an entirely new center console, which I'm not sure if this is available on the normal Ioniq 5, because it's not available in this press photo, but here in the Ioniq 5N, it's totally a completely new part that they added into the car, which I think looks great. And another detail that I love about the interiors of these two cars, both the normal one and the N version, is it still feels, yes, we do have two probably 12.3-inch displays in here for the infotainment screen and the gauge cluster, but compare this to what Tesla is doing. They've been doing it for so long now. I understood that Tesla wanted to get their cars out to market as quickly as possible, keeping everything very simple, but they've been out now for a while, and I think it's time that they put a lot more effort into their interiors and made it something unique and special, not just by stripping everything away, but having details like we have here, a flow in the interior design with different materials, different textures. You can see that we have a brand brand new steering wheel, and this is what I said in the beginning was looking kind of goofy, but at the same time it almost suits the Ioniq 5 because the whole car is so unique in its design. So having this 2-spoke wheel design, personally I'm not a huge fan of this specific design with the 2-spoke. It looks like an old Citroen or something like that. Doesn't look too sporty, but then, you know, the normal Ioniq 5 is not supposed to be a proper sports car either, so I understand why they made it this way and tried to do something unique with it. But the rest of the interior looks absolutely fantastic because we have a lot of physical buttons in combination with the digital infotainment screen up here with some normal looking vents, and this is all carried over to the end version down here. You can see that all the climate control buttons are down here, separated from the main infotainment screen, and this new steering wheel, which looks a whole lot better than the normal Ioniq 5 in my opinion, and definitely adds to the sportiness of this design. I also think that this more chiseled look, it just connects way better with the exterior chiseledness than having this soft pillow in the middle of the steering wheel. So this is going to be a very, very interesting car to drive when it hits the dealerships here, and I can't wait to do that. And especially I want to feel how that 8-speed simulated gearbox is going to feel like in an EV. It's going to be very interesting to see. Overall, a fantastic job by Hyundai putting this out and trying to figure out and work towards a goal of making EVs more enjoyable to drive.